Hi guys, it's MJ Gallagher here, author of the unofficial Final Fantasy VII novelisation, as well as the KupoCon exclusive novella, The Nibelheim Incident, and the forthcoming book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII. As the name suggests, the purpose of this podcast is to explore and discuss a lot of the detail concealed within the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo, and to provide a broader understanding to veteran and casual fans alike. The demo obviously covers the entirety of Chapter 1 of the game, though there are a couple of things omitted that we'll see in the final version. I won't touch too heavily on any content not contained within the demo, but please be aware of spoilers if you don't wish to have anything ruined prior to the release of the main game. Just to be clear though, my knowledge comes from extensive research of the Final Fantasy VII compilation in terms of games and accompanying literature or media, as well as my familiarity with the content shown behind the scenes to journalists, etc. For the remake. For clarity, I have not personally played anything beyond the demo. However, before we dive into the demo's content, and because this cast aims to analyse Chapter 1 as a whole, I wanted to talk a little bit about the game's opening movie. Thanks to Square Enix's release on Valentine's Day, we now know that the demo version is not actually the full opening. I really loved the footage shown, as it's both a fantastic way to set the scene for Midgar and finally ties in the teaser trailer content from 2015 when the remake was first announced. For example, the bird soaring over the Midgar wastelands is reminiscent of the one flying among the construction cranes in the initial teaser, not to mention the swans or geese in Naniki's 500 years later scene. It's also pretty amazing to see Midgar in the daylight, which was something many fans had previously speculated about. The detail is incredible, but is still so familiar. And thanks to Pixel of the Beyond Midgar page for pointing out the visual connection between the Yellow Digger and the damaged one that appears in the original game's Sector 6 slums. And of course, when the scene finally changes to the kids playing at the park with the Moogle slide, we see an earlier image where the reactor's Mako fumes were reflected in the child's eye. In the demo, however, the movie opens as it does with the original game, with Aerith inspecting a leaking Mako pipe. She then gets disturbed by something further down the lane and quickly makes her exit onto Loveless Avenue. The camera lingers on the lane for a moment with the One-Winged Angel lyrics being softly chanted in the background. The player obviously sees nothing there, but the reason is more than just suspense. It is revealed in Chapter 2 that Aerith alone can see the black spirits until she touches Cloud, allowing him to see them too. Therefore, at this point in the opening, they are invisible to the player. The ghosts, if we can call them that, the role in the story is something that I'm curious to learn about. Director Tetsuya Nomura did an interview a while back, and the translation of what he called them is something like the Guardians of Fate or the Watchmen of Fate. And the character artwork shows that they're connected to Sephiroth. Now, I for one, am looking forward to see how this pans out. As always, everyone's favourite epic, Loveless, appears on the billboards of the theatre exactly as it was in the original game. Interestingly though, it also shows the same opening date, which is the 25th of June. Now, according to the official timeline of the compilation, the original Final Fantasy VII starts in December, meaning that this billboard and all the advertisements seen throughout the train station are 6 months in advance, assuming of course the remake follows the same timeline. As is to be expected in HD, when the camera pans up, the image of the city is simply stunning. The depth of detail on the buildings, the highway, the gaps exposing the slums, etc. is off the charts. As it happens, the question I've been asked about the demo more than any other is to identify the extended platform that the camera passes on its way back down towards the train station. Now, if you look closely, there are actually 8 such platforms encircling the Shinra building. My best guess is that they are simply helipads, both from a practical perspective given the 2 helicopters that whiz by the screen, but there's also a resemblance to the helipad from Crisis Core where Zack fights Bahamut Fury, albeit that's actually located at the top of Shinra Tower. During the train's arrival at the station, the camera lingers a moment longer than usual on the Mako fuel cell on the side of the car. This is interesting because it's the first time we're showing such an energy source. In the old game, it's kind of just assumed that the engines or batteries of vehicles include Mako generators or whatnot, but this provides a pretty definitive visual to what's actually going on. Further to this, a quick scan of the locomotive's exterior will reveal some Japanese kanji and the number 600. This exactly matches the model number from the 3D art renders used in the promotional material in the original Final Fantasy VII. The Shinra emblem also appears on the side of the train. Now this is the first time we see it in the game, and there's actually a subtle change to it. In the old game, the name was written as Shin-Ra, but this was never reflected in the text references to either the company or the family name of Rufus or the President. The same is true throughout the compilation, but here it has seemingly been amended to create a bit of continuity. There's also a retcon on Barrett's design, but not with the obvious shades and vest. I'm actually talking about his tattoo. Though he does have a flaming skull tattoo in Nomura's original character art, the current design instead comes from Advent Children, which itself was a commissioned creation from a renowned Japanese tattooist. Another little retcon I noticed in the character design is that Cloud's belt is now the Crisis Core version rather than the original, which was subsequently repurposed as the Deep Ground Soldier crest in Dirge of Cerberus. What I did think was really cool though is how Cloud's eyes react to darkness. If you swing the camera around to focus on him while he's in a spot with very limited light, his Mako infused eyes gleam over like a cat's, presumably indicating he can see in the dark. When the gameplay begins, you barely take your first steps before a battle breaks out. It's a couple of Shinra security officers and Cloud makes swift work of them. What's very awesome here, however, is that the enemies collapse and their bodies dissipate into spirit energy. Quite frankly, this will have almost everything to do with game mechanics and little to do with the Final Fantasy VII lore, but it does create a minor inconsistency. In the compilation, only those with high quantities of Mako in their bodies would immediately merge with the lifestream that way. The soldiers and clones in Crisis Core are a major example of this, but Sephiroth also does it in the original game. From a lore perspective in the demo, this suggests that the Shinra infantrymen are also rich in Mako, which we already know that the monsters are, as the Ultimanias tell us that overexposure to Mako is what caused their mutations and aggression in the first place. Conversely, the robots in the reactor simply fade away. This means that the design team made a conscious decision to show living creatures dissipating as they do, thus indicating a very early introduction to the concept of spirit energy. At the train station, if you look into the distance, you'll note a clock tower confirming the time is 9:10 at night. This actually differs from the original, where the clock overlooking Fountain Plaza in the opening sequence shows the time to be 10 past midnight. One of the most prominent questions about the remake in recent years has been whether it would incorporate details from the Final Fantasy VII compilation, or if it would just become its own universe. This is answered almost immediately. Upon entering the interior of the train station, you get to see advertisements for Benora White Apple Juice, including an image of the purple dumb apple as part of the brand. In case you didn't know, Benora is a town that did not appear until Crisis Core, and the juice itself was invented by Genesis, the main antagonist of that game. Similarly, there's a billboard for a shampoo called Hair Tonic. Now this may either be a joke about the typically wild Final Fantasy hairstyles, or actually a reference to the soldier fan clubs in Crisis Core who discussed at length the types of shampoo that Sephiroth would use. As if to support the latter possibility, a variety of products are shown on the board. The background of an advertisement that may be less immediately obvious is for a new book in a series called The Adventures of Stamp. On the billboard, it's clear that the name is well known in pop culture. The importance of this is that Barrett repeatedly calls Cloud Stamp during the demo, comparing Cloud to a mutt or doggy of Shinra. The art on the billboard also shows an army dog carrying an ally to safety, which, as my friend Dan Hume of the FinalFantasyForums.net has pointed out, may or may not be a reference to Zack supporting Cloud. From the departure board, it shows that all trains leaving from this station are bound for Sector 5. It's unclear if this relates to the plate or the slums, but it's possibly a reference to Crisis Core, where the route Zack takes between the two is the upper Sector 8 station to the lower Sector 5 station. It's also worth mentioning that earlier trailers showed both Sectors 8 and 5 on the board. On the wall of the station you can also see the Midgar transit map, which I laughed when I saw this, as it reminds me of Glasgow's underground. Unlike major city metros like London or Paris or New York, it's quite simply just a loop in my home city. It took John Bentley, who is the voice actor of Barrett himself in the remake, onto the subway in Glasgow, and he felt right at home, as he'd actually spent a lot of his youth in Chicago. Anyway, the transit map shows two lines descending to the slums at Sectors 2 and 5. In the original game, the train that Avalanche escapes on passes through Sector 8, and the FMV shows it beginning its decline straight away. This doesn't appear to be reflected in the remake, so it's possible the line to the train graveyard is the one descending from Sector 2, or none of this is relevant at all, but we'll find out soon enough, I guess. After the first couple of battles, the player gains access to the menu, where they can check their inventory, key items, equipment, etc. Accompanying these are basic descriptions. Now, the text associated with the Buster Sword calls it a large broadsword that has inherited the hopes of those who fight. This is yet another indication that the game has incorporated the compilation lore, as the sword has a history with Zack and his mentor Angeal, who often spoke of the honour and dreams of a soldier. Similarly, you can view the description of Barrett's Gatling gun when he joins your party. The text says it's custom made and was commissioned specifically to fight Shinra. This suggests a reference to Old Man Sakaki of the official novel On the Way to a Smile, who actually helps Barrett with various adapters before settling on his gun arm. The first key item we find in the game is the Mughal medal, which, by the looks of it, are collectible. For what purpose, we'll find out soon. Now, I actually found 3 in the demo. One is in the storage area when you sneak through the fence, and 2 are in the utility access where the laser barriers are. It seems that the boxes actually respawn on the way back out of the reactor, hence the double collection in that area. And speaking of items, another minor touch which I love is that the items that you pick up now have a little more dimension to them. For example, you won't simply find ethers, you'll find bottles of ether. Another is tufts of Phoenix Down. Now, I don't know about you, but the details like this just create a very precise image in my mind and adds so much to the world building, in my opinion. For anyone who has been following some of the journalists or social media influencers who have been involved in promoting the game, you'll probably already know that some things get cut from the demo. One example that I know of is when Jesse asks Cloud if he and Tifa are close. He has a flashback to when they are kids in Nibelheim. It shows that even this early in the story we'll be introduced to Cloud's past and complexities. The footage is available online and has been sanctioned by Square Enix, so you should be able to find it without any issue. It basically shows a brief glimpse of Nibelheim Square, with Tifa calling to Cloud as she plays with her 3 friends. It's unclear if these are the same 3 friends that appear in Cloud's memory while he and Tifa are in the livestream during the original game. As a little tidbit for you, they're actually given names in the early material files of the Ultimania Omega, which are Dan, Well and Mayday. Now, I've obviously already spoken about some Easter eggs that relate to Crisis Core. In the short scene at the President's office, Heidegger mentions there's an ongoing investigation into determining whether this faction of Avalanche is the same group that had made an attempt on President Shinra's life. That's a reference to Chapter 2 of Before Crisis, where the President is shot by Fujito in Junon. Much of the dialogue remains true to the original, but it's been changed up a bit, and I really enjoyed it, actually. I feel that it's an excellent fresh take on the rushed translations and nonsensical conversations of the original. And there's a lot of ad hoc stuff as well, which is really quite funny at times. My personal favourite is the exchange between Cloud and Barrett about the ex-soldier's age. In terms of the enemies encountered, whether the original translation was inaccurate or they've quite simply decided to update the names, we now have several changes. MP, which I assume stood for military personnel or military police, is now security officer. Guardhound has switched to guard dog. Monodrive is the same, but it's now as one word rather than two. First Ray has become Sentry Ray. Grunts are now shock troopers. And I suppose the biggest surprise is that the guard Scorpion has changed to Scorpion Sentinel, which does actually indicate a deliberate amendment, as both guard Scorpions and guard Spiders appear in Crisis Core. In fact, the only enemy in the demo that retained its original name is the Sweeper. There's also a really cool feature with enemies that I stumbled upon by accident. When you press the map button mid-fight, it brings up a load of enemy stats. This includes known HP, attacks, etc., but also a history of how many you've defeated and weaknesses you've identified. As well as that, you're presented with a little bit of information on the enemy. What I found interesting is that the security officer and shock trooper data confirms that Heidegger's Department of Public Safety Maintenance has now changed its name to the Public Security Corps. Now, if you're playing the demo or the full game, I would recommend taking your time when moving through the various map areas to look around. There's so much hidden in plain sight, and veterans will recognise a load of details that have been lifted from the original. An example is the scene where you first get control of Barrett to fight off some monodrives and sentry rays. If you don't explore the room, you may not realise it's the same giant furnace from when you step out of the elevator in the old game. One thing that did strike me as different though, is the way in which the liquid Mako is behaving at the depths of the reactor. The original game's background was obviously pretty limited, as it mixed 2D paintings and 3D models, so it's possible that this is how it was always envisioned. I just found it to be pretty turbulent beneath the deck where you battle the Scorpion Sentinel. Maybe it's caused by the giant pumps, or maybe this is just how Raw livestream acts. Now, this is something that we've known about since the very first demo became playable, but when Cloud goes to plant the bomb on the reactor core, he has a moment of mental trauma. He sees a black feather floating onto the grid and evaporating. This obviously relates to Sephiroth, but it's actually a retcon from the original game. The final boss of Final Fantasy VII is the one-winged angel himself, represented in his Safer Sephiroth form. However, Safer Sephiroth's wing is not black, it's multicoloured. In fact, there's no black on it at all. This was actually first seen in Advent Children, and the image has stuck ever since. At the end of the demo, or Chapter 1, whichever you're playing, the big plot twist is that Avalanche's bomb fails, but President Shinra authorises Heidegger to use security robots to blow the reactor themselves. Now, this is an extremely clever piece of storytelling, as it has pretty significant connotations for the wider plot, but also gets around the issue of the player being part of a terrorist group and the game glorifying terrorism. I've discussed this exact subject several times in interviews and panels, and how Square Enix would address an issue that's ingrained in modern culture now in a way that it wasn't in 1997. It's also a little nod to the original game when the team returns to Seventh Heaven and Jessie gets so confused about the strength of the bomb that she built. Simply put, Avalanche never intended that level of destruction. So, this has been my recap of the Final Fantasy VII Remake's demo, or Chapter 1. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I aim to produce more of these following the release of the game. Please drop me a message if you've spotted something that I didn't, or if you'd like me to explain anything in a bit more detail. And if you haven't already done so, I invite you to check out my Patreon, where you'll find free downloads of my unofficial novelisation of Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim Instant, and much more. Subscribers also get access to a huge amount of original content as well, including project artwork, behind the scenes podcasts, mythology articles, etc. And be sure to look out for my new book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, which launches on April 30th. But until next time, take care, and I'll speak to you again soon.